Welcome to the Pong tutorial. This is where you should start. This is the first video of several where I'll be showing you how to make the classic game Pong. What you can see here on the screen at the moment is basically what the game looked like in its initial form when it came out in 1972. It was made by a company called Atari before people really had consoles such as Xbox and PlayStation in their household. So they would have to go to arcades, which would consist of a few machines that look like this, and you'd have to pay several quarters at a time just to play this very simple game of paddles moving back and forth and trying to hit the ball from your end and past the opponent's paddle. So that's the basic overview of what Pawn looks like. I'm sure most of you have seen it before in some form or another. But the game lives on, and we are going to have the challenge today of creating the game of Pawn with a few different twists. And think about this as you go. I challenge you to think of ways that you could even make improvements upon what I'm going to show you today. But this tutorial's on the basics of how to get it going. So I'll do this in several parts because believe it or not, there's quite a bit of code, as I'm sure you can imagine after doing code.org for a while, just behind a simple game like this. It really will make you appreciate if you're a gamer. Some of the more sophisticated games out there like Fallout, Call of Duty, things like that, just how much code must actually be behind those games and why games like that take sometimes up to 4 or 5 years to develop. So here we go. We're going to load up Scratch. And what you should have done already in Scratch before you even begin this tutorial is you should have gone to tips and you should have done 2 to 3 of these basic tutorial games on the side. That'll give you good context for this and will set you up nicely for creating the Pong game. Where you're going after this is a chance to create your very own game from scratch. That's with no tutorials, no instructions, just you and the program. So that's what we're gearing you up towards. This is a great launch into Alice, which we're doing next year. And if you go beyond that, hopefully you take some programming in high school or even beyond. And it could be a career for some of you guys. And if not, then at least it's a good introduction to thinking logically and will help you problem solve with anything you do in life. So I'm going to get rid of the tips area now, and we don't need that anymore. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Scratch environment to start. And the first thing you should really know is that you should save not only at the end of your game or at the end of the period, but you should save at the start and basically every few minutes, every time you do something that you feel good about accomplishing, you should save. It's not a bad idea in game design as well to save several different file types. So to save, for example, uh, Pawn game 1, Pawn game 2, Pawn game 3. That way, in case you ever make a mistake and your program's not working anymore, or you're happier with the way something used to be, or you lose a file, you can go back to a previous save location. So what I'm doing here is I'm saving to my home drive, as you guys should do, and we're going to save to our grade 7 folder, ICT, and we should call this Pong single player option. Okay. So Pong originally is a game that can be played either against a computer or against another player. I'm going to show you the against a computer version because that's a little bit more interesting in terms of the control scheme. And it gets into a little bit of artificial intelligence too, which is really interesting to take a look at. Um, Theoretically, I mean, there's a point where the computer will be so good that it never misses. And so what I'm going to try to do in my game design, and you can stray from this a bit if you like, but what I'm going to try to do in this advanced single player Pawn is create a game that's fairly easy to win in the first round, but then gets very difficult in the second round. And you could make multiple rounds. You could make 5 rounds that progressively get more and more difficult if you're really up to that challenge. I'm going to stick to 2 rounds. And if you can code what I do here, if you can follow along, then you'll also get a really good mark on this assignment. If you can add things that I haven't even thought about, and I'll give you some tips about what those things are, then you'll get an even higher mark than that. So to me, it's if you can follow tutorials and you can do advanced features, you deserve in the 80s. If you can do even more than what I show you, if you can take my ideas and run with it, than you deserve in the 90s. Okay, so shoot high and try to think creatively as you go about what improvements you can make. I'm going to try to keep these tutorials to about 10 minutes at a time. We're already at the 5-minute mark. And what I'm going to do right now is show you a couple more things you should know about Scratch. So we have the run program, the stop. This is a really important thing to know about here, where we can make this bigger or smaller. Uh, Sometimes you'd want to make it smaller so that you have more room to put your script in. I have a nice widescreen monitor here, so that kind of helps with that. With more limited space for sure, you're going to want to be able to shrink that. The X and Y coordinates here are also incredibly important to understand the concept. You can see that the cat here is pretty close to the center of this, and at some points he's at X equals 0, even Y equals 0, and he's in the dead center. We can see that the X runs from negative 240 all the way to positive 240, and the Y runs from negative 180 all the way to 180. So if you've done integers in math, then you kind of understand that already. Uh, but basically think of it as a coordinate plane where the middle is 0, 0. And up here, everything's positive. Over here, the x is positive, but the y is negative. Here we have a negative x and a negative y. And here we have a negative x and a positive y. Okay, so that's going to help you if you understand that to understand the coordinates of where you're putting objects. I'm going to go ahead and delete the cat at this point because we don't need him, unfortunately, for this. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to start by making a couple of paddles so that there's a way to actually hit the ball back and forth. And I'm going to start by going down to the new sprite area, and I'm going to say paint a new sprite. We're going to go ahead and use the rectangle tool to just go and draw a paddle. You don't have to worry too much about the size because we can adjust that later. We're going to fill it in. I'm going to keep the paddles black. It doesn't matter where you do it here because at the end you can go to this icon at the top, which says Set Custom Center. Now you're going to see that I give you a lot of commands in this, and for those that really do well with tutorials, what you're going to do is you're going to try to do one step, pause it, come back to the tutorial, do another step, and so on. So I'm clicking the costume center, and I'm just telling the program where that is basically. So if you just kind of line that center up here and let it go, then that will know that, okay, that's the center of that sprite that you just made. Now, I've got to tell that sprite now, if we go over here, what its name is, because it's not good to have like sprite 1, sprite 2, sprite 3. We'll lose track of what's what pretty quickly. So I'm going over here and I'm adjusting the sprite's name to player 1 paddle. And I can go back again here. There we can see it kept the name. Now, once you've selected a sprite here, you've got different commands. You've got scripts, and you've got all the different code. A lot of this is going to look like code.org, and that's why I love moving from code.org to Scratch when I teach, because it's very, very similar concepts. Next year, we're going to get into Alice, which is 3D gaming, and you're going to see again that it's a progression from there. Costumes, so we can see we only have the one costume so far, and sound effects that you can put on that particular unit. So I'm going to actually go to scripts here, and we need something to happen when the game is activated. So events, basically this is when something happens. So when the green flag is pressed, what do I want it to do? Well, maybe at the start I want it to go to a specific location, and maybe I want it to be a specific size. So let's play around with the size factor first. I'm under looks now. And we're going to go to basically, where is that? Set size 2. And what do I want the actual size to be? Well, this is where you experiment a little bit. I'm going to try 35% of its actual size because it's really big right now, as you can see on the screen. I'm going to press enter on that, and I'm going to go ahead and run the game. And so far we have a paddle, which I'm fairly happy with the size of. And now I just need to tell it where to go. So we're going to go to motion, and this will allow us to move it to a specific area. And here what we're going to do is we're going to say go to x equals, I know I want it to be around here, so if I look at the coordinates here when I place my mouse cursor, that's going to give me a good idea of where I'm going. So I'm going to go ahead and try 215 and 0, because I want it to start in the center of the screen, at least on the y-axis. Now I'm going to go ahead and run that. And there is my paddle. It looks good. I'm happy with it. It's got some room behind it so that we can consider it a scored point if it gets behind the paddle. So what I'm going to do, since I'm so happy with that placement and the size, is I'm actually going to right click on the sprite and say duplicate. Here you can see I have two identical sprites. And if I actually run this again, it now looks like I have one, but it's actually two that overlap. So let's just change one of these. It doesn't really matter which one. I'll change the second one to computer paddle. And we'll go back here. And I'm going to take the computer paddle, and you can see it's got the exact same script code on it so far. Here and here are exactly the same. That's fine, because I actually want it to be the same size. Remember, my first round of Pawn here, I'm trying to make a game that's not exceptionally difficult. In round 2, I'm going to get to messing with the sizes of the paddle and the speed of the ball and so on. But I want this to be in the opposite spot. So I want the computer to start at -215 and 0. And now when I run it, boom, there we go on the flip side. So I'm happy with that. They're both starting in the same spot, opposite ends. And now I'm ready to go ahead and paint the backdrop. So the backdrop in Scratch is basically what the background of the levels look like. If you're doing a side scroller and when somebody got to the end of one side, you'd want to change the backdrop to make it look like they're moving somewhere else. Same thing with Pawn. We might have a title screen eventually, but right now I'm just concerned about getting the game to work, nothing more, nothing less. So on the backdrop itself, I'm going to go ahead and paint something that will allow it to score a point, a wall basically behind this paddle that will allow it to score a point. So I'm going to take the rectangle tool. I'm going to take red in this case, because I always kind of think of red as a bad thing. So if it touches red, then that means that it's got behind the player one paddle, and the computer has scored a point. So here we can see I'm filling this in with red, and you can see the paddle is kind of touching the red a little bit here. So I could try to shrink that a little bit. I could also just kind of adjust it so the paddle's out a little bit more. I think that's what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to take this, and since I'm happy, I want this to be the same size as the other one. I'm going to go ahead and select it. I'm going to Control C to copy, and I'm going to Control V to paste. And what I have now is an exact replica of that. Now I don't want it to be the same color, so I'm going to say, well, green is a good thing, so green will be on this side, and that way I'll know if the player scores a point if it touches the green on the other side of the screen. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the paddle's location just a little bit here so that we can be out in front of those colors. And again, this is a little bit of experimenting. So I'm on the computer paddle, I'm on the script. I told it to go to -215. I might want to go a little bit less than that. We can try a -210 and run that and see how that looks. There it is. That to me looks a lot better. So I'm actually going to apply that change to both. So this will go down from 215 to 210, run that. And yeah, maybe this one needs to go even a little bit further out from that. Let's try 208 and run that. Okay, and I'll go even a little bit more, 205 and run that. Okay, now I'm happy with that because both paddles are just in front of the areas there, and it looks like we're all set up. Now, this tutorial is already running a little bit over time here. I do want to keep these manageable time-wise, so we're actually going to stop the initial tutorial at this point where we just have the paddle set up and the side scorers set up. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to go on to teaching you about variables. We got to keep track of points being scored. Actually, let's do one more thing. We're going to put in the ball, and we're going to stop there. So in this I'm going to choose a sprite from the library, not painting one this time. The problem with painting the ball, you'd have to paint it perfectly circular, or else you're going to get into some serious bouncing issues. So we're going to choose a ball that they already have in the library. They do have a lot to choose from. I'll just pick this one for the sake of the tutorial. And what I want to show you about the ball here is that you can shrink it to adjust the size of it like so, or you can make it larger. You will probably have to adjust the ball size to get real true bounces, and you're going to figure that out as you go. But a lot of programming is trial and error. Don't be afraid to try things and make mistakes. You always have the edit undo option, which will take you back in time, and so you really don't ever have to be afraid of making mistakes. But at this point, for sure, we've got a ball set up, we've got paddles, we've got score again zones. You definitely want to go back to your file, save as, and you definitely want to find your home drive and your grade 7 folder and your ICT. And you could, we already have Pong single player option. We could create a whole different save file, Pong single player option version 2, for example. And after every tutorial, we'll do a new version. And that way you'll have a lot of different options to go back to, just in case you're not happy with the way something turns out. So hopefully you followed that well and are having fun creating Pong so far. We will see you in the second tutorial.